The town had forgotten how to hope long before she did. Dust clung to the wooden storefronts, wind crept through broken shutters, and hunger lingered in the corners of every home like an uninvited guest. At 27, she had grown used to surviving in silence. Her beauty, once a source of pride for her mother before she passed, had become something dangerous in a place where desperation outnumbered decency. Men stared too long, women whispered too often, and her father, tired, bitter, and drowning in debts, had begun looking at her not as a daughter, but as a burden he could no longer afford. He had not always been cruel. There was a time when his hands, rough from ranch work, had lifted her onto his shoulders so she could watch sunsets bleed into the plains. But grief hollowed him. Gambling finished the job. Cards replaced conversation. Whiskey replaced warmth. The small ranch they once owned shrank piece by piece, until even the fences looked ashamed to stand. That morning, she sensed something was wrong before a single word was spoken. Her father avoided her eyes. He shaved for the first time in weeks. He even swept the porch. The performance unsettled her more than his usual shouting ever had. When the sound of approaching hooves reached their yard, her stomach tightened. A tall rider appeared through the haze, broad-shouldered, steady in posture, mounted on a powerful black horse. The animal moved with strength and discipline, its coat shining despite the dust. The man guiding it looked nothing like the drunken man who frequented the saloon. He was composed, quiet, weathered by solitude rather than vice. 35, perhaps. His face carried the kind of loneliness that didn't beg for pity. It simply endured. She stepped back into the shadow of the doorway as the rider dismounted. Her father greeted him with forced cheer. They spoke in low voices at first. She caught fragments. Strong breed. No better offer. Hard times. She tried not to listen, tried not to imagine, but when her father's voice grew firmer, sharper, she felt the air thin around her. She's healthy, knows how to cook, knows how to sew, he said. Her blood ran cold. The cowboy's reply was quieter. I came for livestock. And you'll leave with something more useful. The word struck harder than a slap. She stepped forward before fear could root her in place. Father, he would not look at her. The cowboy finally turned his gaze toward her fully. It was not hunger she saw there, not cruelty. It was discomfort, as though he had walked into a storm he never meant to face. This ain't necessary, he muttered. It is, her father insisted, unless you'd rather ride away empty-handed. Silence fell between the three of them, thick and suffocating. The wind stirred dust around their boots, as if the earth itself wanted to cover the shame of it. She waited for her father to laugh, to say it was a cruel joke born of whiskey. He did not. Instead, he reached for her arm, not roughly, not gently, simply transactionally, like he was presenting merchandise. You'll have food, he told her, still refusing to meet her eyes. A roof. Better than here. Better than here. As if survival without dignity were a gift. Her heart did something strange then. It did not shatter. It did not rage. It simply quieted. Hope folded in on itself like a dying ember. She realized, in that suspended moment, that pleading would change nothing. She had already been weighed and priced. The cowboy removed his glove slowly. You understand what he's saying? He asked her directly. She forced herself to nod. Words felt useless. His jaw tightened. He looked at her father. You're trading your daughter for a horse. For survival, her father corrected. The cowboy glanced at the black stallion, then back at her. Something conflicted flickered behind his steady eyes. He could refuse. He should refuse. Yet after a long, strained pause, he exhaled. The reins were handed over. And so was she. No ceremony marked the exchange. No blessing. No goodbye. Her father did not hug her, did not apologize. He only grasped the horse's lead with greedy relief, while she stood abandoned in the yard she had once called home. The cowboy motioned toward his saddle. You can ride, he said quietly. She hesitated only a second before allowing him to lift her up. His touch was careful, distant. He mounted behind her, but kept space between them, as though afraid proximity might confirm ownership. They rode without speaking. The plain stretched endlessly ahead, gold fading into amber as the sun lowered. Wind bit at her cheeks. She waited for his hands to grip her waist possessively. They did not. He held the reins wide, avoiding contact whenever possible. When the temperature dropped sharply after dusk, she began to shiver despite herself. Without comment, he removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture startled her more than anger would have. Kindness confused her. Cruelty would have made sense. Night fell fully before they reached his land. A modest cabin stood beneath a wide sky scattered with indifferent stars. A barn rested nearby. No other houses. No neighbors. Just silence. He dismounted first and helped her down again with that same deliberate restraint. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A fire already waited to be lit. He moved efficiently, striking flame without flourish. Warmth slowly filled the room. "There's a spare room," he said, pointing down a short hallway. "Bed's made. You'll lock it from the inside." She blinked. "You're not my property," he added after a moment, voice steady though low. "You'll eat. You'll rest. After that, we'll figure the rest." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. He placed a plate of food on the table and stepped back. "I'll be in the barn a while." He left her alone. She stood there, trembling not from cold now, but from confusion. The world she understood was simple. Power hurt the powerless. Ownership meant control. But here, in this quiet cabin under the vast western sky, the rules felt uncertain. For the first time since the exchange, a fragile crack appeared in the wall around her heart, and she did not know whether to fear it or cling to it. Morning arrived softly over the plains, pale light stretching across endless grass, as though the world had decided to begin again. She woke disoriented, half expecting to find a locked door or heavy footsteps waiting outside. Instead, there was only quiet. The cabin creaked gently with the cooling of embers, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster called the sun forward. For a long moment, she simply lay there, listening. No shouting, no drunken muttering, no cards slamming against a wooden table. Just wind. She rose carefully and tested the door. It opened without resistance. The simple freedom unsettled her more than confinement would have. When she stepped into the main room, she found him already awake, seated at the table with a tin cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up when she entered, but did not stare. He did not smile either. He only gave a small nod, respectful and restrained. "Morning," he said. She hesitated before responding. "Morning." There was a second cup waiting on the table, steam rising quietly. She stared at it, unsure whether it was meant for her. "It'll get cold," he added. She crossed the room slowly and sat opposite him, keeping space between them. The coffee was strong, bitter, real. Not something she had tasted in months. She waited for him to demand gratitude. He did not. After a few minutes of silence, he stood. "There's chores if you're willing. No pressure. No pressure." The phrase lingered as he stepped outside. She followed at a distance, uncertain but unwilling to remain idle. The ranch was modest, a few horses, 2 cows, chickens, fencing that needed mending. Nothing grand, nothing cruel. He handed her a small bucket. "Collect eggs," he said. "If you want." "If you want." She nodded and walked toward the coop, feeling strangely aware of her own breathing. The hens clucked lazily, unafraid. She gathered the warm eggs into her bucket, surprised by how grounding the simple task felt. No one barked instructions. No one hovered over her shoulder. By midday, he was repairing part of the fence near the barn. She watched from a distance at first, noticing the care in his movements. He spoke softly to the horses as he passed, brushing one's mane with absent affection. There was no harshness in him. Even his silences felt gentle rather than threatening. Days passed in this quiet rhythm. He never entered her room without knocking, never raised his voice. When he rode into town for supplies, he returned with small, practical things. A bundle of fabric, new thread, a bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. He left them on the table without ceremony. "For you," he would say simply. She began sewing again in the evenings, sitting by the fire while he read old newspapers or repaired tools. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the room. Sometimes she caught him looking away first. One afternoon, she found a broken rocking chair outside the cabin. Its leg had splintered long ago. She ran her fingers over the wood, remembering how her mother once hummed lullabies in a similar chair. She did not ask for it to be fixed. The next morning, it stood upright near the porch railing, sturdy and smooth as though it had never known damage. She stared at it, then at him. It was leaning, he said, almost defensively. Figured it deserved better. Deserved better. The words echoed inside her chest. That night, a storm rolled across the plains without warning. Thunder cracked the sky open, and rain lashed against the cabin walls like thrown gravel. She woke in panic, heart racing, trapped in a nightmare she could not outrun. Her father's hand gripping her arm, the sound of rain's changing owners, the word burden ringing endlessly in her ears. A small cry escaped before she could stop it. Moments later, a soft knock sounded at her door. "It's just me," he said through the wood. "You all right?" She couldn't answer. The storm outside seemed to press against her lungs. "I won't come in," he added, "but I'll sit here." She heard him settle on the floor outside her room, back against the wall. Rain pounded overhead. Thunder rolled. He began speaking quietly. Not questions, not commands, just steady, grounding observations. "Storm will pass by dawn. Roof strong. I checked it last spring." His voice was low and even, like distant waves against shore. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign, fragile, almost impossible. Gradually, her breathing slowed. The nightmare loosened its grip. She leaned against her door on the other side, separated by wood but connected by presence. He did not try to open it. He did not ask for explanation. He simply remained. By morning, the storm had dissolved into gentle drizzle. When she stepped outside later that day, the air smelled clean and new. He was repairing minor damage near the barn. Sleeves rolled, jaw set in concentration. She approached slowly. "I used to think," she began, voice unsteady, "that if I were prettier or quieter or less hungry, maybe he wouldn't have called me a burden." He stopped working but did not interrupt. He said I cost too much, that I brought nothing back. Silence stretched, but it did not suffocate. "You bring plenty," he said finally, just by breathing. Her eyes stung unexpectedly. After a long pause, he wiped his hands on a cloth. "You don't owe me anything," he added. "If you want to leave, I'll saddle a horse. I'll give you money enough to start fresh somewhere." She stared at him. "No chains here," he continued. "Only choice. Choice." The word trembled between them like something sacred. That evening, she stood alone at the edge of the property, watching sunset spill gold across the horizon. She could leave. She could disappear into another town, another life. But when she turned back toward the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, she felt something unexpected settle in her chest. For the first time, staying would not mean surrender. It would mean wanting to remain. And that difference changed everything. Dawn broke quietly the morning she decided to test her freedom. The sky stretched pale and endless above the plains, washed in soft pink and gold. The world felt wide open, waiting for her to choose her direction within it. Inside the cabin, he was already awake, moving carefully so as not to disturb her. She watched him from the doorway of her room, heart steady but uncertain. He had said she could leave. He had meant it. That was what frightened her most. She dressed slowly, folding the few clothes she owned into a small satchel. The money he had placed on the table days earlier remained untouched, wrapped in cloth beside the door. A silent promise. A way out. When she stepped into the main room carrying her bag, he paused mid-motion. His eyes fell to the satchel, then rose to her face. There was no anger there, no accusation, only something deeper, something guarded. "You heading out?" he asked gently. She nodded once. He crossed the room, without rushing, and picked up the wrapped money, placing it into her hands. His fingers brushed hers briefly before retreating. Even now, he kept distance. "I'll saddle the chestnut," he said. "She's steady." Outside, the morning air felt crisp and clean. He worked in silence, tightening straps, adjusting stirrups, ensuring everything was secure. His movements were careful, precise, as though preparing the horse for someone precious rather than someone leaving him. She watched him, studying the quiet strength in his posture. He did not try to convince her to stay. He did not remind her of storms survived or meals shared. He simply honored his word. When the horse was ready, he stepped back. You'll find a town 2 days east, he said. Good people there. Fair. She placed her foot in the stirrup and lifted herself into the saddle. The plain stretched ahead, endless and unknown. For a moment, she imagined riding forward, never looking back, proving to herself that she belonged to no one. He stood beside the fence, hands resting lightly on the wood. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a quiet ache he could not entirely hide. She turned the horse toward the open land. The wind caught her hair, tugging it gently behind her. The world felt vast, free, frightening. She nudged the horse forward. 1 step, 2. Then she stopped. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. Leaving would prove she was free. Staying would prove she was choosing. Slowly, she turned the horse around. He had not moved from the fence, but when he saw her riding back toward him, something shifted in his face. Disbelief first, then cautious hope. She dismounted before him, hands trembling slightly. I'm not staying because I owe you, she said, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since she arrived. And I'm not staying because I have nowhere else. He waited, barely breathing. I'm staying because I choose to. The words hung between them, fragile and powerful. He swallowed once, as though steadying himself. You're sure? Yes. Silence lingered, heavy with meaning. Then carefully, almost reverently, he extended his hand. May I? He asked. Her breath caught. No one had ever asked permission before. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, steady, protective without being possessive. It was not the grasp of an owner claiming property. It was the touch of a man offering partnership. For a long moment, they stood there, fingers intertwined beneath the rising sun. Weeks turned into months. The ranch changed in small but meaningful ways. She planted a garden near the cabin, coaxing life from soil that had long been neglected. He built a larger chicken coop after noticing how carefully she tended the hens. They worked side by side repairing fences, mending roofs, sharing quiet laughter when animals misbehaved. Her smile came more easily now. Her laughter, once rare and uncertain, began to echo across the yard. One afternoon, as summer leaned toward autumn, a familiar figure rode onto the property. Her stomach tightened before she even recognized the shape of him. Her father. He looked smaller somehow, thinner. Regret etched lines into his face that whiskey once blurred. He dismounted slowly, removing his hat. I heard you done well, he said, voice rough. She stood tall beside the cowboy, not behind him. Her father's eyes flickered toward the house, the animals, the clear signs of prosperity. I made mistakes, he muttered. Could use some help. The cowboy remained silent, allowing her space to speak. For a heartbeat, old wounds stirred, the yard, the reins, the word burden. But they no longer owned her. I forgive you, she said quietly. Her father blinked, startled. But I won't go back, she continued. And I won't be traded again. He lowered his head, shame settling over him. After a moment, he nodded and mounted his horse once more. This time, when he rode away, she felt no abandonment, only closure. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains in gold, the cowboy stood beside her on the porch. You all right? He asked. She smiled softly. I am. Autumn deepened. Leaves turned amber along the distant creek. On a cool evening beneath a sky heavy with stars, he built a small fire outside the cabin. No grand gestures, no crowd, just quiet sincerity. I don't have much, he said, voice steady despite nerves. But what I have is yours, if you'll have me. She stepped closer, heart full rather than fractured. Yes, she whispered. They married simply, beneath open sky and endless horizon. No chains bound her hands. No transaction marked the moment. Only vows spoken freely, witnessed by wind and earth. Seasons continued their patient rotation. The ranch flourished. The cabin expanded. Laughter replaced silence. Sometimes, at sunset, they rode together across the plains, side by side, not as owner and owned, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two souls who had chosen each other. Once, she had been traded for a horse, her worth measured in desperation. Now she rode with her head high, equal in saddle and spirit, and in the steady kindness of the lone cowboy who had offered her freedom instead of chains, she found not just safety, but the beautiful life she had always deserved.